As I've referenced before when talking about some of the other running backs in the 2017 draft class, there were three big marquee names that got the most attention and got the most publicity and that most buzz. That was Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, and of course Christian McCaffrey. These were the three stars at the running back position, the three guys to be perceived as all future elite potential first round type of talents for this upcoming 2017 NFL draft. And it's easy to see why a lot of people really like Christian McCaffrey's game. Here's a guy that was a 2015 Heisman Trophy finalist coming off of that monster season, and for a lot of reasons, in my mind, probably should have won the Heisman Trophy over Derrick Henry. I thought Christian McCaffrey was much more important to his team and his team's success than Derrick Henry was. That's not to crap on Derrick Henry because he had a great year and his team ultimately won the national championship. He played a major role in that. He was a stud. Understand why he won the Heisman. My personal choice for Heisman based off of impact to team and meaning to team and significance to team and the amount of different things that he could do to dominate a game compared to Derrick Henry was why I thought Christian McCaffrey should have been the 2015 Heisman Trophy winner. I mean, because he could impact the game as a runner, a receiver, and as a return guy. That's multiple ways that he could dominate a game, impose his will upon a game. And in 2015, he did. Now, 2016, there was a bit of a drop-off, but to be honest, 2015 was such a special season, it's almost like there had to be a bit of a drop-off, but he was still very productive. And throughout his career, he ended up with over 5,100 total yards from scrimmage, 33 total touchdowns when you throw in the 2 that he had as a returner. He finished his career averaging over 6 yards per carry, over 12 yards per reception. I mean, this is a guy that you look at him sometimes and you don't see big play potential, but it's there, and he makes big plays happen and made it happen consistently the last 2 years at Stanford, especially more so in 2015. And when I look at Christian McCaffrey on film, what's really impressive to me is that he's a jack of many trades. Now, he's probably a master of one, which is his ability as a receiver, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Maybe you want to throw in his return skills. But in terms of complete backs in this draft, he is probably the most complete when you take in all the different areas that he can impact. Like Fournette is first and foremost a between the tackles runner. He can do other things, as I alluded to in his scouting report. Dalvin Cook, I think, can do more things, especially when you factor in his abilities as a receiver. Alvin Kamara as well, and I think Kamara's got a little bit more return ability than Dalvin Cook. But in terms of as a runner between the tackles and on the outside, as a pass receiver, and as a punt return and kick return guy, Christian McCaffrey is the most complete of those backs, has the most potential ways that he could positively impact an NFL team and potentially make things happen during an NFL game. And that is really, really intriguing. And I appreciate those guys that are willing to kind of try and put a team on their back. And just like with a Fournette and just like with a Cook, you see that type of big man on campus type of approach and attitude when it comes to Christian McCaffrey. In terms of the biggest strengths of his game, first and foremost, I reference just the balance of his game. Even when you look at my grades for him, there's not a lot of spectacular things. He's not the biggest, he's not the quickest, he's not the fastest, he's not the most explosive in the open field as a cutter. But so many things are really good. So many things are really good. And that's just really is what stands out to me first and foremost is that he can impact the game between the tackles a little bit as a runner, even though I don't know how much of a living he wants to make doing that at the NFL level. But he can make some nice runs happen on the outside. He can perhaps cause even more damage as a receiver out of the backfield and on the outside and out of the slot. He's a guy that can impact the return game. I mean, I just love, if I'm thinking about this from a scout standpoint, a GM standpoint, a coach's standpoint, there's so many things I get rolled up into one player. And then on top of that, I love his vision and patience. As good as anybody in this draft class. The willingness to wait for the hole to develop, for the blocking to set up, the ability to see, the ability to feel. Sometimes that's an intangible thing just in terms of instinct. Sometimes you can feel the guy coming up behind you and you make the subtle body movement to avoid the tackler. I see Christian McCaffrey do that, and it's just really impressive the way he's able to see the field and the way he's patient enough to allow things to happen and develop in front of him. His most impressive skill, though, has to be his receiving skills. the most complete route tree by far of any running back in the 2017 draft. I mean, you're going to hear plenty of arguments, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, that he could be a really effective slot receiver full time at the NFL level, maybe an Edelman type of guy. And there's potentially something to be said about that, because he's that good of a receiver. Wonderful natural hands, great route running ability, expanded route tree, ability to separate. Could be a real matchup problem for safeties and linebackers trying to cover him, especially if you're playing him out of the slot as a receiver. I mean, he's dangerous as a receiver, and I'd argue almost more dangerous as a receiver than he is as a runner. I mean, just truly special in terms of his receiving skills as a running back. And then you look at his return ability too. He's a guy that you could utilize as a kick returner, and more importantly, probably at the NFL, he's a guy that you could utilize as a punt returner with decent athleticism, but really good again vision and patience, which is important I think when you're trying to be an effective return guy. You got to know how to set up the blocks. You got to be able to see how things are setting up and be able to read and react to them and go with it. He could really be a potential field position changer as a punt return guy, which is very important at the NFL level. I mean, so he's got some things I really, really like. When I watch him, though, I see a dude, and he was the dude at Stanford, but I don't know if he necessarily has that dude factor at the NFL level. Because, like I said, he's a jack of a lot of things. He does a lot of things well. But I don't know if he does enough things at such a high level that you look at him and say he's a 20 carry per game, 18 carry per game type of workhorse back that gives you this and also gives you that and also gives you that. I think you might have to be selective in terms of how you use him somewhat at the NFL level to maximize the return on the investment. But in terms of actual skill sets or things that concern me the most outside of that, pass protection. He wasn't asked to do that a lot at Stanford, nor should he have been. I don't know how good of a pass protector he's ever going to be. I see some desire and willingness to block. He's just not very good at it. He's not very strong. But again, with a guy like McCaffrey and all the things that he could do, the last thing I'm concerned about is his ability to be a pass protector. It's that simple. If you're utilizing him like that consistently on passing situations, then you need to have your head examined in terms of your offensive play calling. I think durability is a bit of a concern. He's a bit of an upright runner, which could lead to, at the NFL level, more ball security concerns than he had at Stanford, but more so he could potentially take some really big hits, especially with his willingness to run between the tackles. He's been a guy that's been dinged up and nicked up a little bit. He's not the biggest dude. So I have some concerns about durability at the NFL level and whether he's going to be able to hold up truly to being a feature back, if he's going to be the type of guy that can absorb the punishment of a 16-game season. There's some concerns there. There's definitely some concerns. The biggest concern, though, is ultimately, to me, what's his best position at the NFL level? I think he can be a running back. And be kind of like that Swiss Army knife type of guy that you use some as a runner, you use plenty as a receiver, and you use him in the return game. Could you get away with just using him as a runner and a receiver and use him more there and not use him as a return guy? Perhaps, but is that really the best utilization for him? Based off of his size and based off of his skill set, he's a better receiver than he is a runner. Is it better off just making him a receiver, a slot receiver full-time at the NFL level? There might be some teams that are weighing that or potentially considering that if they do take him. Then that'll be a question that has to be addressed. At the end of the day, I think it's best when talking about Christian McCaffrey and talking about how you potentially utilize him to view him as kind of that Swiss Army knife, jack of many trades type of guy. You want to find ways to get the ball in his hands as many different ways as possible. And I think utilizing him and making him a full-time slot receiver is not the best utilization for him because you're potentially limiting the number of times you get the ball into his hands in a game. I would still like as much as possible to get 20 touches for Christian McCaffrey a game. Now, maybe only 10 or 12 of that come as a runner. Maybe 5 or 6 of those come as a receiver. You get a few opportunities as a kick or punt returner. I want him to have 20 touches per game because if he gets 20 touches, I have to think eventually some good things are going to happen and some potential big plays are going to happen. And that's why the NFL comparison that I hear so often bounced about with Christian McCaffrey, I think is so appropriate for him, and that is Reggie Bush. Reggie Bush, you're talking about a former, well, unofficially now, I guess, a former Heisman Trophy winner, but a guy coming out of USC, he could do everything. And the perception was is that he was going to be a true impact back, and he had Hall of Famer written all over him. He was special, and his NFL reality, frankly, was a little bit different. He wasn't a bust. He played for over a decade in the league, um, and he definitely had some impact in terms of his all-around skills. He was somewhat effective as a runner, but even more effective as a receiver, and pretty effective as a return guy. That's the type of career I envision for Christian McCaffrey. And I don't think that's a bad comparison. And I think he could do much worse than being a Reggie Bush, frankly. I think sometimes Bush gets a bit of heat for being the second overall pick in 2006 and not quite living up to that billing, fucking with the Kardashian slut. Some of that kind of gets factored in. The USC crap most certainly doesn't help his overall image. But Reggie Bush was a solid NFL player, and he could do a lot of different things, and he could score a lot of different ways. And if that's the type of career that Christian McCaffrey has, then I think he will have done very well for himself. You know, will he end up having a career as good as his dad's, Easy Ed? Because Easy Ed, what? Didn't he win 3 Super Bowls? Wasn't he on San Francisco for the 94 title as well? But he was there for the Broncos in 97 and 98 for their 2 Super Bowl wins. So he's got that bloodline, that lineage there. He's grown up around the NFL. In a sense, he understands, he's learned from his dad what it takes to succeed at the NFL. Everything you hear about him, he's a hardworking kid. He's a decent leader in the locker room, although maybe his leadership style could potentially rub some veterans the wrong way early in his career. There's a lot to like about this kid. My final grade for him was an 89.0. Just a little bit above Alvin Kamara, but again, not very much. I could understand some teams valuing Kamara a little bit more because Kamara is more explosive than Christian McCaffrey. But you look at the college career, and you look at the production, and you look at the multiple ways that Christian McCaffrey can impact the game. I think a guy with a high second round grade that has a potential to be a late first round pick sounds about right. I mean, this is a talented player. Very talented player. In terms of his best fits at the NFL level, I think Kansas City would be a great fit for him. I think his best pure fit, especially when you're talking about if he was to be taken in round 1, when you see Christian McCaffrey, it screams Green Bay Packers. A relatively high character guy that works hard, that could do a lot of different things. That just screams Green Bay to me. That screams the type of guy that Ted Thompson, you would think in theory, would absolutely love. A guy with versatility to do multiple different things, and a guy that would perfectly fit in the backfield with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, New England, that would be another great fit too. I mean, granted, you've already got Deion Lewis and James White, but I think McCaffrey can do even more than those 2 guys. So he would be a great fit there too. I think the fit in Green Bay is even better. If he slipped into round 2, I still think you have teams like New Orleans. He'd be a tremendous fit. Philadelphia, he'd be an outstanding fit. And even Minnesota, he'd be a really good fit, being a guy that could give you something out of the backfield, especially if you decide to move on from Adrian Peterson. I don't think Christian McCaffrey is going to be the top running back to come out of this draft. He wouldn't be the guy that I would take first or second out of the running backs in this draft. But I think it'd be criminal if he wasn't taken by the early portion of round number 2. But he was still a really productive college player. And a lot of the things, more importantly, that he did well at college, he projects to be able to do well at the NFL level, especially in the modern NFL game. While the value of a kick returner is not nearly what it once was, you still need somebody that could really be effective as a punt return. He could do that. You need that running back that you can do all types of different things as a receiver. He could do that. He's a guy that can give you some carries out of the backfield. I think he's better than a Theo Riddick type. I think the Reggie Bush comparison is very appropriate. And again, if you got a Reggie Bush type of career out of him, I think you've done very, very well. And if anything, I'd expect Christian McCaffrey to potentially have a better NFL career in terms of overall production than Reggie Bush did.